prove it that this is correct. Well, compost is the product that
use the mic.
The compost is the product that brings the acid soil up towards neutral and the alkaline soil. It's a great balancing act. This is the purpose of the compost in our gardens out here. And so in my garden, I decided to show people that this was actually true. We plant rhubarb. Now, you know we can't grow rhubarb here, don't you? Well, we do. You can grow rhubarb here if you plant early in the season and you get the biology right in the soil. We didn't worry about the pH. It can be 7.6 or so, and I can grow some beautiful rhubarb here. The problem around here is the heat more than the alkaline soil. But you know rhubarb grows in the more acid soil. So we've been doing this. We grow the plants that like an acid nature, but when we fix the biology of the soil, we don't have to change the pH that much. A good living soil will grow rhubarb in this area. So it's true that it's the organisms that make all the difference in the world.
Judy will be interviewing you shortly for an article on rhubarb and one of the upcoming issues of homegrown, I'm happy to say. Well, while you're talking, another question was, how can one make their own potting soil with natural ingredients found in your home or your garden or readily available things? You make some of the best potting soil I know of in your Vortex soil. Would you talk a little bit about good potting soils and what makes them good?
We do use compost mainly. I didn't want to bring any more peat moss down from Canada. It's just not sustainable. It's a good product. It makes a fine soil, but I don't believe that it's sustainable at all. Core fiber is something else that people are using, but we're not using that either. I was trying to find stuff that was within our region. And it took many years to really put this soil together, but it's based around compost with some granite sand, and I do have a little expanded shale. I used to get it here in San Antonio where they made bricks, and it's called haydite. So I've been around this product for many years before they actually discovered it. So I use it. It's called haydite in our mix, and we put that in there too. And I use some rice hulls. And I'll use an assortment of different types of compost in order to get a wide array of organisms in there too. So compost, some perlite, some granite sand in there, the expanded shale, and a little bit of rice hulls, and it makes a beautiful, beautiful potting soil. That's how we do that.
And you know, one of the things that one of my mentors, Alton Grimm, told me years ago, people would say, I want topsoil, but I don't want any weeds in it. And Alton would say, I would really worry about topsoil if it didn't have weeds, because there'd be something wrong with the soil if it didn't have weeds. I want to ask you and Malcolm both, you go through a pasteurization process with your soils. How do you eliminate the weed seed and things before you bag it?
The composting heats up enough to knock out the weed seeds, or the microbial activity knocks out the weed seeds. That's not a problem, really.
Well, we don't use much soil in our potting mix. Soil will tend to separate and cake in there, and so it's not one of the ingredients. But if you compost soil along the way, then that changes the character of the soil, and you could use a little bit in there. But we really don't add the soil, so there's not a weed problem. But the soil that we do use is recycled soil. It comes off the roots of trees. We get it from what's now the Gardenville Company out of Austin, TDS. And so we get some recycled soil from these folks, and there's just never any weeds in it. So it comes from deeper in the soil and not the surface, because Bob's right. In the surface is where the seeds are, where the weeds are growing. But down deeper, although it's anaerobic, it certainly can be brought back to life through composting, and so that's how we do that.
Our big compost pile, you know, we work with a big front end loader, we put soil in there to get by.
Yeah, once it's composted, it's a beautiful product. Put it into your compost bins at home. Take dirt from the garden and put it into that compost bin, and that'll be the prettiest compost you ever had. It's a real good product. And earlier, there was a question, and that just now reminds me of the fact that if you want to change the character of that clay soil, put your compost bin on it. And make a pile of compost there, and then move it down a little bit, and that'll be the prettiest soil down there that you ever saw, without doing much more than making your compost right on top of that spot. It really changes the soil forever.
Can we call that a compost tractor and get ready to talk about it?
It's similar to a compost tractor, except you do it by hand. You turn it into the next one, and then you turn it into the next one, and then you're just moving down the line. It's a 3-bin method.
I'd like to give these two gentlemen, since they're talking right now, a chance to defend themselves a little bit too, because one of the most common things I've heard about both of their products is, man, I put their compost on my soil and there were weed seeds came up everywhere. That compost must be loaded with weed seeds. And of course it's not. So why don't both of y'all talk a little bit about what happens and why people may see more weeds when you use good compost.
I mentioned earlier that on a multi-seed head, some of those seeds are thickly coated with a shellac. They won't sprout until the right microbial activity and carbonic and humic acids and everything there to sprout them. And when we create a good soil mix like that, we got all of those things to sprout those seeds. That just means it's good soil, right, John?
I think so, yeah. That's it. And so that's what's happening. You put that compost down there, you finally activate those seeds that have been there for 10 years, maybe longer. And that nutgrass grows like crazy when you put that compost down there. I never had nutgrass. No, I never had nutgrass, but they did have nutgrass, and it came up through the compost. So what I go do when they say that is, I'll go visit with them, and I'll start digging around that nutgrass, and I'll dig around that nutgrass, and it'll go below the applied material, down into the soil, and they see for themselves that it really didn't come in the product.
Those nuts can be 18 inches deep.
Yes.
And in defense of nutgrass. On my first one, I had a lot of nutgrass. Where the nutgrass was the thickest, I grew the biggest watermelon. And also the extension service said, forget the apricot tree, you're not going to grow down here. Well, I put that apricot tree up there where all that nutgrass was, and we made excellent apricots until we moved from there. So it's not all bad.
One of the big organic farms in Austin, Boggy Creek Farm, has nutgrass all over the place. And in the beginning I asked them, what are you going to do about it? You know, and they were always trying to solve the problem. They never did anything about it, and they grow some beautiful produce, and they don't worry about the nutgrass at all.
Thank you, John.
Judy, how are you on citrus? Questions about citrus, and I know you grow a bit of everything. Any advice about growing citrus and how to get it to hold and set and mature its fruit better?
Well, I don't know much of anything about citrus. But that never stopped me before. I would like to add one more thing to this issue we've been talking about, and that is sheet composting, which is one of my favorite things because, again, it doesn't involve a whole lot of digging. You can compost in place where you want to improve your soil by putting down some kind of barrier, cardboard, newspaper, something like that, and piling compost, manure, mulch on top of that. And it will mellow the soil underneath and even kill your nutgrass if there's nutgrass below it. So that's something I think you should consider. As to citrus, my experience with citrus is it likes the heat. It needs sun, it needs good drainage, it doesn't like cold. You can protect them without bringing them inside by putting some sort of protective covering around them, like row cover, something like that, and putting some little light bulbs inside with your plant to keep it warmer in the winter. It needs good soil, it needs regular organic fertilization because most of us grow them in containers and the fertility is depleted quickly in containers. Was there a specific?
Not really, just weren't setting a lot of fruit.
Oh, the old not setting fruit. You know, John mentioned before the pollination, and pollination is a big issue because we're having a problem with bees dying off. And anytime people are running around killing every bug they can see, it cuts down on the pollinators that are available. So you need to try to encourage these creatures. Last year I had a big bunch of bees that just annoyed my hummingbirds something terrible. And they would not go away, and the hummingbirds finally gave up and left. And I kept thinking, well, this is really annoying because I'd rather see hummingbirds than bees out the window. On the other hand, I was delighted that the bees were there and that they were healthy enough, and I think we should encourage them whenever we can, even if it does annoy our hummingbirds and ourselves. And as a byproduct, you know, my vegetable garden and my fruit garden did very well because I had those pollinators there. So look around and see if you have these kind of critters in your garden. If they're not there, try to encourage them by putting out some hummingbird feeders, putting out shallow dishes of sweet water, anything you can to encourage them.
And if you put out honey water, the bees prefer honey to sugar. Float a sponge in it so the bees don't fall